So I bought this skid steer roller for a job that I was just on, and I didn't get to use it on that job, but I did leave some work so that I can test this out. I need to fix this. I don't really know much about this. I don't have a user manual or anything, but the first thing is my quick coupler doesn't work for here because it hits like right here. That little swivel point right there hits on my quick coupler there. So it doesn't hit by much. It almost seems like you could shave a little bit of the bottom of this off, but there's like a nylon or some sort of rubber piece behind here. And to make this work, I would need to cut into that rubber or nylon piece there. So that's not going to work. Ultimately, what I need to do is weld on another quick change plate here, or quick tack plate, whatever you want to call it, and just extend everything out another 1.5 to 2 inches, and then it'll miss that. You know what's weird is this looks like they started out with one plate, because you can see there's like that evidence of that plate there and that there, and they even had this here, which I think was actually bent down at this angle at one point. And you can even see like it's doubled up right there. See how it's doubled up there? So I think they put a plate on here originally, and then they tried to use this one to bring it out another 3/4 of an inch or so. And then they did something funky with this too. They put a bunch of spacers in here, and then they welded on a spacer here. I don't know if they went through a bunch of design changes or what the deal is, but it doesn't work for my skid steer, so I got to change it. It might work for some like Bobcats or something, or some other kind of skid steers, maybe Cat, just because of the way that the design is right there. That piece of steel is probably lower, so it works, but it doesn't work for me, so I need to change this. So I think the easiest and quickest and cheapest option is to just take this skid steer plate, quick tack plate, and weld it onto here. So I bought one of the cheapest quick tack plates I could find, and I'm already finding some troubles with it. If you look down, it doesn't even really show up that much on camera, but it's bent pretty good. This side is up 1/4 of an inch, and the other side is up 1/4 of an inch, and we're touching in the middle. There was a few different options when I was buying this quick tack plate, and they had it down to 3/16, or you could get it all the way up to 1/2 inch thick. So I chose kind of in between. I did 5/16, which matches what's on here already. So I figured there's no reason to really go more than that. So everything on here is 5/16 thick. So right now, with it laying flat on here, it's hitting the bolts, which you can kind of see there. It's hitting those bolts for that swivel. So I need to cut out a little area first, just so I can lay this flat. And then I'm probably going to have to start welding here first, and then put some weight on the sides and tack weld those, and then hopefully that'll take the bend out of it. I think I can get it to the point where it's touching on all sides except for this one right here, so might have to put a little filler plate in here, but I think everything else, once I bend it, it'll be close enough where I can just weld it right to the steel that's already there. So it looks to me like this piece is like that for a reason, so that you can access it if you ever need to take it off. I don't know, maybe to take the drum off, you need to take this off, I don't know, but I want to leave access for that thing. And I also want to leave access for that too. So that's why I cut it out like this, so that I could remove these two things if I need to. I could have just cut it all the way up, it would have been easier, but I figured I'll leave a little bit of an arch there. That way it sends support that way on both sides. Not like you really need it because the quick attach goes on the sides, so I don't think any strength is needed here, but there's no reason to hack away more than I need to. So like I said, all three sides are so close that I can just weld them. Even this side, I can just weld it inside of there. But I need to do something with this side. So I think what I'm gonna end up doing is cutting off all of this right here, slicing it right here, and then right there, getting rid of all this. And then what I can do is weld a plate from here to here, and here to here. Maybe I'll even just cut this plate off too. It's easy enough. It's only a few minutes worth of work. So I'll just cut off basically all of the bottom of this other plate so that I can have easier access to weld on some plates to support this new quick tack here. You can see more evidence of two quick tacks already here. You see how there's that plate right there, which is this one right here, and then there's this one right here, and then there's the new one here. So this will be the third one that goes on here, I'm pretty sure. If you guys watched my last video where I was doing that driveway and parking lot job, you'll know that these things are really expensive if you want to buy a good one. They start at like 10 grand, and They go up to 15. I've even seen one for 18 grand. But I just don't do enough work that would warrant me buying one of those. You could pretty much buy another whole skid steer for that. Or you could buy a nice roller, ride-on roller, double drum or single drum with the wheels on the back. You could actually probably buy 2 of them for that. But I still want one of these. I just didn't want to spend a skid steer or 2 ride-on rollers for this. So I got this for pretty cheap, knowing that it's gonna need some work. I may or may not get more than a few minutes out of it, and it may break down. There's a lot of people saying that they only got a little bit of time out of it, and then they had to completely overhaul it. So all I can say is we'll find out. The nice thing about this is that if it dies, I can just pick it up and put it on the trailer. If I buy like a roller and it dies, then I got to use another machine to try to get it on the trailer somehow. So if it does die, I guess it's not the end of the world, as long as something doesn't catch on fire or somebody doesn't get hurt. So any place that I'm going to weld this new plate onto the old plate, I'm going to grind it off good, get the paint off, and then we're going to weld that up, and then we'll see what's next. So on this particular attachment, it's going to be the opposite of most attachments that you put on a skid steer. Most of them, you're going to be pulling up on the top and pushing on the bottom. Like a bucket would always be exerting that sort of force. And yes, occasionally you backblade where you put compression on the top and you put tension on the bottom, but most of the time it's compression on the bottom and tension on the top. But this roller is pretty much consistently going to be compression on the top and tension on the bottom. You basically want to put all of the weight that you can on the front of the skid steer, which means lifting the front of the tracks off the ground just a little bit, which means compression on the top, tension on the bottom. So I need to beef up this area here, otherwise that's just going to pull away. A lot of the tension will be brought over to this side, and there's a weld on here, so that's good, but the pin is way over here. So there is going to be a lot of tension over here, pulling away. So to try to counteract some of that, first of all, I need to re-weld these spots here because they were welded before I cut them. Now they're not. So I need to re-weld these 2 pieces of steel here on all these. And then I'm going to take a piece of 3/8 steel, which this is 5/16 and this is 5/16. I'll put this 3/8 right in here, and I left a pretty big gap there, so that I could have almost an 1/8 of an inch gap here to put a nice hot weld in there. is anytime you leave a big gap, the weld gets hotter. It penetrates more. So I got this one here, which that's where the pin's gonna be. And then I got this smaller one right here. But you can roughly figure the skid steer is 8,000 pounds. If you lift the front of it up, you're probably not pushing down 4,000 pounds on this plate because the back of the skid steer weighs a lot more than the front. So realistically, maybe 2,000 pounds you're putting on this. So now if you take 2,000 pounds onto that plate, 1,000 pounds is going to be pushing on the top, 1,000 pounds is going to be pulling at the bottom. But then there's also going to be some of that weight dispersed going straight down. So as far as tension on all that right there, I don't think I'll even see 1,000 pounds worth of tension between that point and that point, which is distributed between all the different welds that I'm going to have, as well as the side. So these spots right here, they might only have like a few hundred pounds of tension on them. But worst case scenario, let's just say like absolute worst case scenario, they got like maybe 500 pounds of tension on each one of them spots. That would mean that there's like 3,000 pounds worth of tension on the whole bottom of that. So 500 pounds, and that's a 5-inch spot there. That's only 100 pounds per inch. And these welds, if you get them good enough, with this little MIG welder, I'm sure that I could get at least 20,000 pounds per inch of weld that I got on there. So you do the math. As long as those welds are anything even close to decent, this is like 100 times more than I need for this tension here. And the steel itself, forget about it. You don't even have to worry about that. Because steel has excellent tension properties. It just has less than ideal compression properties. Even mild steel like this, tension, it's really all about the welds. That 3/8 steel is not going to break. And yes, you could factor in the jolting of things with the vibrations and maybe hitting some rocks and stuff, the jolting of things. So times everything by 4 and you're still not even in the same ballpark as what this should be able to handle. So I think this is the first time I've ever gotten an attachment and the hoses were actually long enough, surprisingly. But I still need to convert these hoses to put quick couplers on. And this is a metric female, which I've never even seen these before. But this part has a little O-ring on it. And so the way it seals it is the O-ring goes inside of this surface right here. So I got an adapter to convert it to pipe thread. This is 1/2-inch NPT. So this smaller hose is what they call a case drain. Basically that takes any excess pressure from this whole motor and brings it to the tank. It keeps everything cooler and it protects your hydraulic system in your machine, as well as it protects this motor too. I think the way it works is very high quality hydraulic motors don't need those case drains, but I could be wrong. I'm not totally sure on that. So the biggest takeaway that I got from reading about this attachment from other people online and watching videos and stuff, number one is going to be greasing the crap out of it. So I'll probably end up using a couple tubes of grease on all the grease fittings. And I noticed that that was a big problem for a lot of people. They didn't grease it enough, or they didn't grease it at all. They thought it was already greased. Another thing that I read up on about this attachment is to check all the bolts, because I guess a lot of the bolts were loose from the factory. And then when you run it for a little while, check the bolts again. I pretty much figure I'm gonna have to check the bolts every time I use this, and I'm probably gonna have to grease it every time I use it. A lot of these drum rollers like this have a fill port for oil, and even reading through the manual for this one, it says to check the oil, but there's absolutely no place to put in or check the oil on this. So I have no idea why that would be, but I did see other people that had this attachment that didn't have oil in them and they were using them, so I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. But I think right now I just want to start testing things out, because the biggest complaint about this attachment was that it started smoking immediately within like 5 minutes of use. So I'm going to grease this up real good, check all the bolts, and then we're going to try it out. So I put about a tube and a half of grease in this fitting here, which has a hose that goes in the middle. I don't know if that's for the bearing that spins the drum or if it's something to do with the shaft inside. I don't know. No grease came out when I put it in, even a tube and a half. I don't know if that's enough. But now I need to get to this other grease fitting, and it's right there. And that hole isn't even close. You can see that. So I did see that other people had this problem, and they had to cut with the plasma cutter, like cut a notch out right here to get to it. So there's just these two grease fittings here, and then on the other side, right in the middle on the shaft, there's one. So obviously I'm not thrilled about having to cut this notch out with it being right next to that motor like that, and there's grease in there, and there's rubber isolators right there and everything else, but it is what it is. Guess we'll find out. So that's not great, but I guess it'll work. Wow, okay. That grease fitting just came out. I don't know why that would come out like that. I just put a full tube of grease in there too. Another thing that I found out that might save this attachment is people were saying that when you press the button, it's like an instant on. It's like a washing machine. When the water turns on, it just instantly turns on. It doesn't ease into it. Like the hydraulic fluid going into it just jolts it. And I think they were saying that that is really bad for the shaft that's inside, or the Lovejoy, the coupler. So every time I turn this on and off, I'm going to use the pedal, which you can ease in and out of. If you use the buttons on the joystick, it's just on or off. But if I ease in and out, I think it's worth a shot to just keep doing that. If you get in the habit of it, then it shouldn't be too bad. And luckily it got configured to where the pedal going forward makes the drum rotate forward, and the pedal going backwards makes it go backwards. So that's nice. so far so good. Let's see if we can get 5 minutes out of it. I got some concrete over there that's left over from pouring my roof. I'm gonna try to break it apart so that I can use it as more of like a gravel, because I want to put like some stone right there for a driveway, for a parking area. So let's see if we can break that apart with this. I don't know, it doesn't seem like it hits that hard. I can feel it vibrating, but it's not hitting as hard as I've seen other attachments. Didn't really break this stuff apart. Now, to be fair, it's very soft ground underneath of here, so maybe it didn't have a rock in a hard place effect to give to it to break it apart. It kind of, instead, it just pushes it down into the mud. So I guess that's not the best way to test it. But I guess all we can do is just keep testing it 5 minutes at a time, keep checking to see how hot things are. This motor is pretty hot right now. But I don't think the motor is the thing getting hot that's the problem. I think it's the coupler inside, which is a few inches inside of the drum. So I guess I kind of got to feel around for that. You can feel the hoses are hot and everything. That's just, I think that's probably pretty normal. It definitely feels pretty hot when you reach back there and feel, but I can touch it, so it's only about 100 degrees. But still, for 5 minutes worth of use, I don't know. I don't know if that's normal or not, but we'll just keep checking it, I guess. So the only thing that's really getting hot on this is going to be this motor and the lines that are going to and from the skid steer. These are pretty hot. That's almost too hot to touch. That's maybe like 130 degrees, something like that. Which I guess doesn't seem that hot for skid steer hydraulics, but I haven't been using it that long, maybe 15 minutes. So if you're using this all day, that'd be really hot. But again, that's the hydraulics. I don't think anything would change that other than having the bigger lines on here. But without using high flow, I don't think you need more than 1/2 inch anyways. That's what this is, so I don't know. I think it's just working it pretty hard. But one thing I did notice, there's 4 rubber bushings here that hold this drum in place here. And what I was noticing was this drum was actually rubbing on this metal right here. And when I looked in it, I had some weight on it, and I looked in here and the bushings were bent to the side. So I don't know if they're just not like hard enough bushings. Maybe they're too soft. These bolts are still tight. You can see the lock washers are locked in place. So I don't know what that's about, but it was definitely scraping the steel. But when you start out with low expectations, I'm thankful that it does anything right now. We'll just keep playing with it until we break something. Or not, maybe not, I don't know. Keep it greased up and maybe it'll be fine. I could definitely see how when you press the button and it just immediately turns on, it definitely seems like it's jolting that shaft more than it should. One other thing that I noticed that I don't like at all is the fact that this does not pivot that well at all. It's very hard to get this to pivot. I almost want to take those bolts out and take this whole plate and separate it from here. Maybe take one of these sides off and put some grease all up in there, because it was like binding up and it doesn't tilt unless you really put a lot of pressure on it. Ultimately, what I really got this roller for was to take stone and spread it out on a driveway or a parking area and smooth it out and compact it. That's really the main reason. I'm not trying to break apart concrete with it. So the real test is going to be getting some stone and spreading it out. The problem is, today is Monday. For some reason, the gravel yard's closed. And tomorrow's the 4th of July, and I'm sure they're going to be closed tomorrow. So now I'm looking like 2 days from now where I can get some gravel. So I don't know why the gravel yard is closed the day before 4th of July. That doesn't make any sense. for that whole area, I was able to quickly compact it. Whereas if you were using a plate compactor, that would take all day. The one thing I noticed that I gotta fix, I'm gonna do it right now. Like I said before, this isn't swiveling the way it's supposed to. It's been stuck at a slight tilt that way this whole time. So what happens is I'm leaving marks on that side, and that side isn't quite compressing enough. So it just leaves lines all over the place. As you're going over uneven surfaces, that's supposed to be swiveling very freely. And I can guarantee you it wouldn't be leaving those lines if that was rotating like it should. So I need to get that fixed. I also think that it's putting too much pressure on this side, on these rubber bushings in here because of that. Because it's kind of evening itself out with the rubber bushings the best it can. And I can tell it's putting a lot of stress on those bushings, and there's barely any weight on those bushings. You can kind of see evidence of it too because it's scraping right here. You can see it down the bare steel there. I had actually taken some oil and just ran it down this crack right here, hoping that it would seep down and it would free things up, but it never did. It's not moved at all. So I think at this point, what I need to do here is take these two bolts off. Hopefully this will come out, and then I think this will just pop off. I don't know how this part works over here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that, but... Oh, okay, you know what? I see. There's like a slot. There's like an oval slot behind there. So it needs to have both of these come out for this plate to come off. So we'll do that, and I guess I'm gonna have to take off all the bolts on the sides too. We'll just take the whole thing out and we'll inspect it and see where it's rubbing, because it should be obvious. There should be some paint worn through to the steel. So then we can just kind of assess it from there and see what we need to do. That wasn't very tight. See how that top one works. That one's got to come out too. Hopefully this isn't jammed in there. You know, looking at this plate, I think this is where the problem is, right on the sides. I don't think it's going to be in the actual body itself. There's a few scratches here and there, but it's not anything close to this. That's probably why it stopped moving. This other side is the same thing. The steel is like curled up right there. I bet you that's what it is. I bet you I just need another one of them shims. The biggest problem I see is this little flap here that sticks out is not level. See how that's like 3/16 down? Same thing with this side. So that flap is just bent down. Which if it was on there, it would be bent out. You know what it is? This steel is doubled up right here. So you can see they got like this 1/4 inch piece here, and then they put another piece of, looks like 3/16 on the bottom, and they welded it right here in the corner. And I'll bet you anything that because they welded it on the bottom only, it warped it down as they were welding it. I bet you that's exactly what happened. I don't know why everything is an afterthought with this. Like, they should have just had this plate that thick to begin with. You can see that their solution to it was to just add some shims. Which there's 2 shims on each side, so I think what I'm going to do is just make up another 1/4 inch shim. I can just take this, trace it, cut it, take the mag drill, drill it out. plate might not be enough. I got one on each side, but look how far this is away now. That's kind of crazy, really. Alright, so it definitely moves easier. I think half the reason is because I put that plate in there, the other half is because I greased everything up. I don't know, I guess we'll try it out. Now that I know what the problem is, I don't have to take this whole thing apart again if I want to revisit that. I was almost thinking what I could do is take like a piece of rebar, like 1/2-inch rebar, and stick it right here, take all these shims off, and just have this 1/2-inch plate and use it as like a press, and that 1/2-inch rebar would hold it here, and I'd bend this all the way back past where it needs to be because that rebar is there, and then it should straighten that out. But before I get into all that, let me just try this out. It probably is fine the way it is. that definitely made a world of difference, just being able to swivel this. I got all the lines out, and it just, in general, just did a lot better. So I think I'm confident in this roller enough to bring it back to that job. So let's go over there and put some fine item 4 down and roll it out. So that roller was doing a pretty good job. I started over here. This is compacted pretty good. I got to somewheres over there and it started raining pretty heavy, which I thought was a great idea to keep the dust down. But the problem is it was making clumps stick to the roller. So that wasn't very pleasant. But then I adjusted the scraper on the front all the way so it's as close as it can get. And I also waited for it to rain for a while because it rained for a good hour. So what that did is it washed a lot of the fines down, which also helped. So you can see we got like some pothole type areas right here. All along this spot right here is like a little bit low, I guess. But there's no way to get everything perfect. Because if you have everything flat, then there's nowhere for the water to drain. And on a big parking lot like this, that's not exactly what you want. You kind of want like a little bit of a low spot to send the water that way. So basically right now the water comes down like this, comes down like this, and it drains that way. And other than digging this whole thing up and putting like number 2 stone in, some clean stone with some corrugated pipe or some ADS pipe or some triple wall pipe, and you know, doing the whole drainage bit, this is about the best you're going to get. The other option is to put blacktop on this, but I don't do any of that. But the customer can always do it in the future if they want. It's pretty much ready for that. I wish we had more drainage away from the house. If that was like 2 or 3 feet lower and it could all drain this way, that would be a lot better. But it's still never going to be perfect no matter what you do. So towards the end, while I was rolling, I heard a sound on this roller. It was like a hydraulic sound, like something shifted hydraulically. And immediately after that, I saw what appeared to be smoke coming out of there, but I don't know, because it was raining. It could have been steam. I don't know. But I let it rest for a while and cool down. And then I rolled the rest of the driveway out and it didn't smoke again. So I don't know what the deal with that is. But that's like the #1 complaint about this roller, is people say it starts smoking. And I greased this thing really good. I put 3 bottles of grease in here. So I don't think it's a lack of grease. But here's where maybe you guys could help me. I mentioned earlier that in the instruction manual it says that you're supposed to fill this with oil, but there's no place to fill it with oil. So I don't know if I have to like punch a hole in the drum and thread it and put a bolt on there or something so that I can fill it with oil. Because I guess you'd need 2 bolts on it, one to fill it and one to drain it. But I just don't know with this thing. I don't know what's up. The instructions were very vague with it. I found a PDF online and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing with this, really. I spent a long time looking this thing over to make sure there was no hole for putting oil in here. I didn't find anything, because there would be 2 holes. And there definitely isn't any holes. Unless you have to like take the motor out and put it somewheres behind the motor, I don't know. But I think having it filled with oil, that's a lot of oil to put in there, but I think having it filled with oil would definitely help keep it cooler, and it would help lubricate things up. But that's another thing I don't understand, is the grease is going to be at the end there and it's going to mix with the oil. So is it grease or is it oil? I don't know. So if anybody out there has ever had one of these rollers and you know exactly what to do with this, your help would be appreciated. Because it did do a pretty good job. And even after it was smoking, I got it to work again and nothing seemed to be wrong with it, and it didn't smoke again. So I don't know, I'll grease it, I'll keep it greased, and we'll just keep going along with it. Hopefully I don't have to make a part 2 about this roller, but if I do, I guess you guys will see it soon. But anyways, we're done here, and I know it doesn't look great, but the rain will wash away all this silt. That's like the silver looking material, and the rain will make that look more like that, which is nice blue looking. So that's it for this video, guys, and hopefully you don't see a part 2, but either way, we'll see you on the next video.